There they are. Okay, great. So happy to have Cesar here. We're going to go for an hour, and then we'll have the stream open for questions and comments afterwards. But if you have a question as we go, just go ahead and treat this like a regular in-person seminar. Unmute yourself and ask your question as normal. Okay. All right, Cesar, you have an hour. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks very much for the invitation. This is joint work with Carlos Cachondo from Western and from the
So there's something wrong with your sound.
Yeah, your sound just went bad.
Can't hear you.
You might try turning off your video. Maybe you're having a bandwidth problem, or maybe you just muted yourself. I don't know.
I think he moved his microphone or something. We're going to Dorian's office.
Oh, you haven't heard me talk yet, so you don't know.
Yeah, it could be the whole Fed. Could be
Russian
an attack. Yep. So we're still not hearing anything, Cesar. I don't know if you're talking at the moment or not, since we can't see your face now either.
He can't hear us either. He's probably wondering why no one's asking questions. Dorian, do you want to knock on his door? He can't hear you. We can't hear you, Cesar.
And he was doing just fine until it came time to start talking. Okay, we can't hear you.
Let me see.
There you go.
Sorry.
That's
Okay.
better.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see. Should I keep going? Kim, should I keep going? Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the glitch. I don't know what happened. But if I go silent again, please stop me. All right. So as I was saying, this is joint work with Juan Carlos Cachondo, Leo Martinez, and these are just our views and not the IMF's or the Fed views. Okay. The paper is about sovereign debt standstills. Okay, and I'll do my best to explain exactly what those things are. The starting point of this, the motivation, is that as a response to the pandemic crisis, the G20 agreed on something that they call the sovereign debt standstill to the poorest countries. Okay, what the standstill means is a debt service suspension. So essentially, think of a grace period, right? But with the emphasis of having this suspension without haircuts, meaning without reductions in the face value of the debt. Moreover, after the G20 did this, there were also other proposals, in particular one that got a lot of attention by Bolton and others, many sort of famous economists here on this other, that push to include other kind of creditors, in particular private creditors, and to extend this standstills proposal to other type of countries beyond the poorest countries, so in particular to include middle income countries. All right, so that's the motivation. The motivation is this big policy sort of push or debate that started after the right at the onset of the pandemic. But even before the COVID-19, this idea of introducing standstills have been present in other discussions of sovereign debt restructures. In particular, it has been typically pushed for countries to reprofile their debt, and the reprofiling of the debt is kind of like a standstill before implementing IMF program. And there has also been a push for including bond covenants that would trigger a standstill if the country suffers a liquidity shock. Okay? So against this backdrop of either policy proposals as a response of the crisis, or even these ideas before the crisis hit, what we want to do is to evaluate this type of proposals. Okay?
So hold on, Cesar, can you go back for a second? I just have a quick question. So is it just the G20 basically said that they they don't need to accept payments, or the G20 somehow decided these poor countries didn't have to pay anyone their debt service? If I'm a private,
No, okay. No. That's a good point. Of course. Sorry, I didn't make this clear. So let me go again. The G20 agreed on a suspension of their payments to the G20, so on official debt. Okay, and this was, voluntary, so the countries could opt in or not. And therefore, and then the second bullet point is related to the second part of your statement, which is that after the G20 did this on official debt, there were other proposals to include other type of debt, in particular private debt, and to extend this opportunity to other countries, particularly middle-income countries. So motivated by this, what we want to do is we want to evaluate the effects of this one-time debt relief, right, which can come in the form of a standstill, as I just mentioned, or can come in the form of a standard write-off. Okay, and by write-off I mean just a reduction in the face value. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to use what we think of as the simplest sovereign debt model to evaluate this one-time debt relief policy, either a standstill or a write-off or a combination of the two. Okay, and sort of and see if there is what's the best combination, what's the best way of doing this. What we find is that these standstills create welfare gains for the sovereign, that is the debtor, but capital losses for the creditors. Right? There is one exception to that result, and the exception is the case in which the standstill actually avoids an immediate default. If this standstill does avoid immediate default, then it's good for everyone. But in every other case, it has welfare gains for the sovereign and capital losses for the lender. Consistent with these capital losses, we find that the creditors are reluctant to participate. Okay, and we find that in a simple model that abstracts from free riding problem. So if one were to add a free riding problem to this, then we think we expect that reluctance to participate will exacerbate. What we also find is that if countries do a standstill, then that in itself may create a debt overhang of sorts, and therefore it creates an opportunity to do a voluntary debt exchange, something that we've analyzed in the previous paper. And I'm gonna draw the connection between the papers as we go along.
Cesar?
Yes, go ahead.
Just intuitively, like, why is it that like a group of investors can do something that would make them better off, that the government can't just like refinance its debt? Like, is there some collective action problem? Is that what you're kind of hinting at?
Yeah, I'm hinting that what I'm going to treat the creditors as a group here,
yep.
Right? And I'm going to show that there are opportunities for essentially that there are Pareto gains to be made between the debtor country and this group of creditors. Right now, if the creditors were to behave atomistically, or then we will have something like it. We could potentially have something like a free riding problem in which I would like to free ride on you, you accept the debt reduction, then the country is better off, then I don't accept the debt reduction, I get repaid anyways. So that kind of problems are absent in what we do. So that's when I think of the creditors. Let me answer in a different way. I'm gonna show you a situation where there's no collective action problem. The creditors are perfectly coordinated.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. I have the sense I didn't answer correctly or very satisfactory. But let me see if I can improve in the next slide. On the contrary, we find that write-offs, that is, reductions in the face value of the debt, can create gains for both the sovereign and the creditor. Now, the intuition for this result is as follows. When the income, this is going to be an endowment economy where income is the only shock, right? So when the income is low or the height or the debt level is high, then this model is characterized by bond prices that are very sensitive to the changes in the debt level. Okay, All right, so that's step number one in the equation. The second step is that the standstill and the write-off move the debt in opposite directions. After a standstill, the debt goes up because the payments that are postponed and earn interest. Okay? So a standstill brings about an increase in debt. Since the price is very sensitive, the price falls a lot. So the market value of the debt, which is the price times the quantity of debt, goes up. That's the capital loss for the trade. With the write-off, the opposite happens. The debt level goes down, but since the price is very sensitive, it goes up. And that can generate situations in which the market value actually increases. So that will be a capital gain for the trader. So precisely because the standstill increases future debt, it can generate a debt overhang, and therefore it can create situations in which doing a write-off is quite improving, meaning both parties are going to like.
Just so two quick questions. I mean, probably you're going to talk about this, but a standstill is sort of like I pause the payments.
Exactly.
But you know, it's sort of the value of what I owe keeps accruing. So that's why it's not like I shift everything out into the future.
Okay.
You know, I'm allowed. It's not declared a default that I didn't pay today, but I still owe what I didn't pay.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the write-off looks like sort of buybacks with this coordination.
Yeah, no, all right. So I'm gonna try to talk about this again later on when I introduce exactly how the standstill works. But a write-off is just a reduction in the face value. There's no buyback. It's like just extinguish a part of the debt. That's what a write-off is.
But sort of, does that have a parallels to this buyback sort of issue where, you know, the buyback drives up the value of the debt so they actually owe more, and these kinds of situations? Is there something similar going on?
Yeah, so I mean it shares elements in the sense that if the debt goes down, the price goes up, right? But I guess you can think of it that this is a buyback at zero price. So it's like the country is paying nothing to write this off. It's writing it off. It's like imposing a haircut on the other guy. The point here is that you as a creditor may like this write-off because the price goes up, and then there's a possibility for the market value to go up. Okay. They move on. All right. So, okay. So how do we do this? Okay, as I anticipated, we're going to use the standard framework for sovereign debt with long-term debt. Right? The economy is going to receive a stochastic endowment every period, and that endowment moves according to this AR1. And the objective of the government, which is going to be the agent making all the decisions here, is to maximize the utility of the representative agent, which is standard in every respect. The borrowing opportunities are very important here. This lending is going to be vis-a-vis risk-neutral lenders, and the instrument available is a non-contingent long-term bond. So it's a perpetuity with coupon obligations that decrease geometrically. Okay, this is a standard trick to have long-term debt without increasing the dimensionality of the face base. Okay, so a bond traded in period T is a promise of paying 1 in period T plus 1, 1 minus delta in T plus 2, 1 minus delta squared in T plus 3, and so on, until the government defaults, okay? Which leads me to the next slide. The government can default, and if it defaults, it doesn't have to pay any current nor future obligation contracted in the past. Okay, so all the debt gets wiped out. And here in parentheses, I'm anticipating that our results are robust to adding a positive recovery rate. So that is not ready in the result. Now, if the country defaults, it faces two types of costs. It faces an exclusion cost. So during a stochastic number of periods, the country cannot borrow. And during all those periods in which it cannot borrow, it faces an income cost. So it faces a reduction in income given by phi of y. okay, which is spelling out the functional form here as a quadratic cost. Again, sort of standard in the literature. All right. So those are all the elements of the model, and these are all the equations there are. Okay. So a government that starts the period with debt level B and income Y has to choose whether to default or repay. And as I said, default is total, so it's a binary decision. If the government decides to default, that's B sub 1, where the 1 stands for the default decision. It becomes, that period becomes hand to mouth, so it just consumes income minus the cost. And then the next period, there's a probability psi that it gains reaccess, and if it reaccess, it does so with 0 debt and the income of tomorrow. And the probability 1 minus psi that it remains excluded, in which case the continuation value is B1 of Y prime. Now, if the government decides to repay, then it has to, then it becomes a consumption savings problem. Then it has to choose the debt level, B prime. So that's the debt of tomorrow. And the consumption of today is given by the income that you have minus the coupon payments of today, P, plus the issuance of new bonds times the price. So that's the issuance revenue. So you have the price and the issuance, which is going to be P prime. P prime are the coupons that are due tomorrow, minus 1 minus delta V. These are the coupons that would be due tomorrow if today you issue nothing. So that's what the issuance is. The continuation value is what it should be. Now the bond price is given by a zero profit condition of the lenders, and it's just telling us that the price of one bond today, one bond is going to trade at the price Q, which is the expected discounted repayment probability. So this is 1 minus D. D is the default policy. So 1 minus D is the repayment policy. And if the government does repay, then you as a lender, you get the coupon, that's 1. And 1 minus delta of the bond is still alive because it's a long-term bond. And that has a market value given by the price of tomorrow, which is this term. So this is exactly the bond pricing that you would expect in this kind of models. So let me say one other thing. If delta goes to 1, then this term goes away, and this is just the repayment probability, exactly as in the one period debt model. Okay. So that's all that's the entire model, right? Which, as I said already many times, is the standard stuff. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to calibrate it using a very common calibration that we use in previous papers, where the reference is Mexico. The model is calibrated to a quarterly frequency. And this is literally the calibration we had in this 2014 paper, I think. So here, the two sort of key parameters are the two parameters in the cost of default. And those guys are going to be calibrated to target the mean debt and the mean spread.
So, Cesar, I have a quick question, and this is a question that's about most of the papers in this literature. So, if the period's a quarter, and then you only get this income penalty, then you just get it for 1 quarter. Is that right?
So, no,
you don't.
It's not right in the model. No, you get it every period you're excluded.
So every period you excluded, you get the income cost. I didn't get that from the beginning. I thought it was.
Sorry. No, yeah.
Because you're excluded, you're in a recession or whatever. Okay. All right. That makes sense. Okay.
I mean, it is the last thing you said. I think I want to say something else, right? Okay. So the default happens in bad times, typically these models, and also today, yeah, typically. Okay. So in general, default happens when you are in a recession, but since this thing is mean reverting, then most likely you start recovering right after default.
So I just meant by recession that you're getting an income penalty.
Yeah.
That's all I meant. That's what I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's what I understood what you wanted to say. Just thought that maybe.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So.
Cesar, before you go on for a second, the income process that you're thinking about here is kind of like a standard income process, but the kind of the policies were kind of put forward in response to like an income process that's like much more volatile and much less persistent. So is there any sense in which we should be thinking about some Markov switching between, I mean, I don't know exactly what you're going to do in mapping the model to like the COVID event and thinking about this. I mean, again, I don't know if you want to think about this as like standstills always or standstills just in these kinds of shocks, but it's
No,
a very, this shock doesn't happen in your model, right?
okay, so let me, I'm going to say a couple things. First, the entire exercise in the paper is a one-time exercise, right? So the standstill, and that makes it very tractable what we're doing.
Yep.
Very, very simple to sort of convey, right? You could, if you wanted, you could include the standstill in the bond clause, which means that it will get priced, and then this pricing equation wouldn't apply anymore, right? This is the pricing equation when you don't have a standstill. Okay? So you could have the standstill as a possibility all the time, and that it's a slightly more complicated model. That's not what we're doing right now. That's one part of, that's related to one part of what you said. The other part of what you said is whether this, how we're going to map how we're going to map the model to the COVID shock. The first thing I want to do is just going to be a drop in income, and then income's going to recover according to that AR1. That's the first thing I want to do. But then I want to show that the results that we get are consistent if we think of it as a more persistent, as more temporary shock, meaning that you sort of go like a U shape. If we want to think that COVID was more like that, and the results that we find again, which are that write-offs are superior to standstills, is robust to these two models. We don't have a richer process that you also mentioned, say a Markov switching between this AR1 and something like that.
But I guess that the general point is that these policies, when they're not foreseen, can have some benefits.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. So I was saying this is a standard calibration, and then we have no problem fitting the data. That's the only purpose of this slide. Okay, these are our targeted moments, the depth and the spread.
I just a comment on this.
Mm-hmm.
The sovereign debt guys do this all the time. Like your first two moments are they're not separate moments, right? Like the volatility or the first moments.
I know what you're about to say. I know that you're about to say that the trade balance and the consumption are the same moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know. You and I had this discussion like a couple years ago.
At least I'm consistent.
Yeah. You're consistent, and I knew you were going to be consistent, so I have rational expectation. That's it.
Dorian did the same thing to me a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Who did the same?
Dorian, she you were going to ask that, George. Anyhow, okay, thanks.
Sorry, but yeah, you're right. Of course. Yeah. So that comment aside, we think that this is a reasonable approximation to the data. So, and therefore it makes it a reasonable place in which to play with these policies. Okay. All right. So now to the exercise. Okay. So we're going to study three sizes of the shock. The only shock in the economy, as I already mentioned, is endowment shock. So it's going to be an endowment shock. Okay. And the sizes are going to be given by what happened to market access around at least at the onset of the crisis. Okay? We're going to think of a small shock as one that increased spreads by 250 basis points. With that, we're trying to think of countries that preserve market access during the beginning of the crisis. For example, Mexico. Then we're going to define something that we're going to call a large shock, which is one that maps into an increase in 1,000 basis points. And that, in that case, we're thinking of sub-investment grade countries like Sub-Saharan Africa. And the third type of shock, or the third size of the shock, I should say, is one that we're going to call a default triggering shock. And that is a reduction in income such that the country will default if you provide no debt relief, but will repay if you provide a standstill. Okay? That's what we call the default triggering shock. Of course, small, large, and default triggering map into different sizes for the income shock. That I'm going to show you later. The two policies we're going to study are a write-off, which I already said is a reduction in the face value of the debt, and a standstill. A standstill is the following. There's going to be no debt payment during TDS periods. Okay? That's the grace period that you get. During that grace period, the government can borrow or buy back debt. So we're not imposing, right now, we're not imposing any further restrictions on the budget constraint. The creditors' holdings, those debt payments that were coming due but now are frozen because of the standstill, those are going to grow at some given rate. Okay? And that rate, RDS, is related to Darren's previous comment, is going to be the equivalent of the risk-free rate plus the average quarterly spread. So we are giving these guys something that we think is ex ante fair compensation. Okay. During the standstill, the government not only is free to move the debt, but it's also free to declare a default.
Sorry, Cesar.
Go ahead.
You say you're giving them fair compensation. You're not giving them the new spreads, the market ones, right? Like you're giving them.
Exactly. No, I'm not. And that's going to be part of it. That's another way of stating the result.
Okay.
That this compensation is not going to be what happens to the spread in equilibrium. If I were to give them exactly what happens to the spread, then these guys
right
wouldn't complain.
Then it's not going to have any impact, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
It says that the governments don't know that this is a possibility when they're solving their problems, when they're not getting the shocks. This is like an MIT policy.
This is an MIT policy, yes.
Okay.
And the last thing I want to say in characterizing what a standstill is that during the standstill, the government can declare a default. And if it does so, then the standstill ends, because the standstill is a suspension of debt payments, and if you default, there's no debt payment. So that's also. All right. So I'm gonna with these two policies, the write-off, which I didn't write words for in the slide, but it's just a reduction in the face value. With the write-off and the standstill, I'm going to be looking at two things. I'm going to be looking at the welfare impact that it has on sovereign. The welfare is going to be measured in permanent consumption, the usual way. And I'm also going to be looking at capital gains for the creditors. Now, those capital gains or losses, the loss in particular, that's how I write it in the slides, is the percent decline in the market value of the debt. Okay? So what is the market value of the debt? The market value of the debt at the beginning of the period is B, the position, times 1 minus D. So if the government defaults, market value is 0. And then times the stuff that you get, which is 1, that's the coupon payment, 1 minus delta, what's left of your holdings, times Q, the market value, the market price. So the entire thing is the market value. That's the market value of the debt, the usual model. And then we also have the market value of debt during the standstill. That's why it has this DSJ. Yeah, this is during period J of the standstill. The standstill can have many durations. So in that case, it's B, 1 minus D, as usual. But then you don't have a debt payment, so a coupon payment, sorry. This one that's up here is absent down there. That's what I want to highlight. There's no coupon payment, but your holdings grow at a rate 1 RDS. That's the market value during this time. Okay. Now, the name of the game for the entire paper is this thing over here, right? What is the best debt relief strategy for a given capital loss? So imagine that we can impose a capital loss on creditors. We are not saying how, but imagine that you could, right? If you could impose a capital loss on creditors, say 10%, what is the best way to do it? With a standstill, with a write-off, with a combination of the two. All right, so let me first show you what happens with these two measures that I mentioned before, the welfare gains and the capital losses, in the case of a standstill. Okay, I'm going to focus for most of the talk now on the large shock, but then I'm going to show you how this looks for the other shock. So the spread goes up by 1,000 basis points, given our calibration. That's like a decrease in the income stream of 5%.
But Cesar, just to fully understand it, it's
Yeah.
always kind of weird. Like when in these default models, when I don't pay my debt, I incur like a penalty, right? And so there's some kind of connection to like, I don't know what it is. It's all reduced form. So like how much I'm kind of fulfilling my obligations and how well like my production sector works. And so when you're kind of like giving these kind of special haircuts without like incurring the wrath of, you know, not screwing up the productivity process, it seems like the linkage there is kind of broken in some way. It's almost like you're giving like one type of way of in the end, it's like a partial default, but you're giving it an advantage.
I see your point. Yeah, so these efficiency losses or debt weight losses that come out of the default costs are avoided with this standstill. So the standstills are imposing none of those. If I were to impose those on top, then I think it becomes even less. It becomes less attractive for the sovereign. That I can say unambiguously. My hunch is that it's not going to do much to the attractiveness for the creditor.
Okay.
Maybe even worse, but I don't know.
All right, thanks.
But I see your point. I see exactly what you're saying. Right. So what? Let me tell you how I want you guys to read or understand these plots. What I have here, so I'm plotting capital losses on the horizontal, welfare gains. Those capital losses are for the creditors. Welfare gains are for the sovereign. Those are the vertical. Okay. And the point 0, 0 is the do nothing point. Right? The shock hits, and there's no write-off. There's no standstill. The economy just reacts the way it reacts. Okay, so that's the comparison point. Okay? And then this point that says 1 year, that is, what are the capital losses compared to the do nothing if we impose a standstill that lasts 1 year? We see that if that happens in response to a large shock, then there are capital losses of roughly 20% for the creditor and welfare gains of, say, 0.3% for the sovereign. Okay, so the sovereign likes this, but the creditors don't. Okay? And if you extend the standstill, meaning if you make it 2 years or 3 years, then this implies moderately higher gains for the sovereign, that's on the vertical, but larger losses for the creditors. Okay? So this is what happens with the standstill. This, if you want first result, says that it's not surprising that private creditors don't want to participate in this because it's bad for them. Okay. Now, why does that happen? What I'm plotting here is the dynamics after the shock and with the standstill and without. So the black line is no relief, meaning no standstill, no write-off. The red lines are with the standstill, and the only plot that has an extra line is this one to economize on subplots. This is the income process. Okay, so the income falls and then it recovers, right? And what we see is that with the standstill, the debt grows, right? It goes up, and it goes up because the standstill precisely has in its rule, if you want, that the coupon payments that are avoided are added onto the debt. Okay, so during the standstill, we see that the spread is much higher because the markets anticipate that at the end of the standstill, the sovereign is going to have a lot of debt. Okay, and that increases the spread, and therefore decreases the market value of the debt. Okay. So that's what happens during this policy. I mean, as a response to this policy. David.
Hey, how are you?
How are things?
So I want to ask you two questions. One is, so you take the R standstill as given, right?
Correct.
So that on the previous graph that would change the slope. So, but it's not a policy, so you cannot choose that in the contracts. That
I'm not changing the R of the standstill. No, that is taken as given.
And your question? So go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's all.
And regarding this, so I just ask you this, but the fact that the process of output is an R1, so it recovers very slowly. So I guess that some advantage of debt standstill would be like you have a liquidity problem, you know that the output will recover very fast. So you don't want to go through the deadweight losses of a default. But that doesn't show up here, right?
That doesn't show up here, correct. So in a robustness that I'm going to show you later on, I'm gonna argue that our results are robust to also incorporating something like a sudden stop during the crisis, a period in which you have a very severe liquidity shock where you cannot borrow. So that will be ourselves giving the standstills the best possible shot that we think. So that's how. But I completely get the rationale for the question.
Cool.
All right. So I'm back to this plot. Okay. And what I do now is, as the slide says, write-offs, they produce larger welfare gains and smaller creditor losses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here on the 1 year standstill, okay? And I'm going to couple that with write-offs of different sizes. Okay. So each dot here is like 7. It's an incremental 7% write-off. So 7%, 14%, 21%. So what this point here is saying is that the standstill of 1 year coupled with a write-off of 20%, roughly 21%, can give you something like a 1% welfare gain and almost no capital losses for the traders. Okay? So immediately the result we find here is that it is better, at least in this case, to couple the standstill with a write-off. Right? So you can think of this part of the curve as an agreement zone, right? If for any reason, some political reason, we agree on a standstill, then immediately we're going to agree to couple that with a write-off, because moving along this green line, we are both better off. There are lower capital losses for the creditor, higher welfare gains for the sovereign. So this curve is like a mirror of the market value of the debt. Okay, so what I have here is the market value of the debt and the initial debt level. The sort of golden line is what happens if there is no shock. The black line is what happens if the shock occurs, but there's no debt relief. And then the other 3 lines are for standstills of different durations. What you see is that, I'm gonna magnify this for a second, sorry. What you see is that when the shock hits, you go from here to here, all right? And then you're in this situation. So the negative shock kind of puts the economy on the wrong side of the market value curve. So immediately there is a region to improve, which is all of this, right? We could agree on reducing the debt, and the country is better off because it has lower debt, and the creditor is better off because it has higher market value, right? So we could see, agreements on, for sure, agreements on this area, and maybe something also all the way over here. So the fact that this puts the economy on the wrong side and the debt level curve behaves like that, that's what explains this shape for this blue curve here. What I said in the introduction, that the standstills generate even larger possibilities for these debt reductions, is what we have here for the black line moving to the blue line, say, right? The black line is the shock, but no standstill. The blue line is the same shock with a standstill. So there's even a further region in which countries will agree to reduce the debt. Countries and creditors will agree to reduce the debt. Okay. So why is this?
Just go back to this this picture. So in some sense, this depends on the fact that ex ante this potential for these policies is not expected.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the existence of this hump. Why aren't these guys always renegotiating? The country got a bad shock. It's like, oh, we could make everybody better off by marking down, by putting in some state contingency. No, Because if we knew
Oh.
that in advance, this wouldn't work.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah. Okay, so now let me show you the IRFs when I also add this third combination, which is a standstill and some write-off. And what we see is that doing that has, allows the economy to sustain higher consumption during the entire path. The debt level reduces first because of the write-off, and then it increases. And the spread is lower through the entire path, and the default probabilities are also smaller. And crucially for the creditors, the debt, the market value is much better than with the standstill. Okay, so I've shown you what happens when we do a 1 year standstill, when we couple that with some write-offs. And now the point I want to make is that only doing write-offs is the best option. Okay, so now I'm going to fill this from each point, from the no standstill, 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year. I'm going to couple those with different sizes of write-offs. Here, the legend of the plot says haircut, which was my wording before. So you think of this as write-off. What I've been calling the write-off. Okay. So what we find is that only doing write-offs is the best way of dealing with this shock. Okay. So in particular, if you want to say fix points somewhere, here, right, is like a 28% write-off or 28% decline in the face value of the debt. That leaves the creditors indifferent, but can generate welfare gains of up to 1% per solar. Okay. Or if you want a point like this, like 15% write-off can improve both situations, right? It delivers negative losses for the creditor and positive welfare gains for the solar. All right, so this plot and the IRFs that I showed were for this, what we define as the large shock, meaning drops in income that increase the spreads by 10%. Okay, but this result that write-offs dominate standstill survives even if we do a small shock on the left, or if we do the default triggering shock on the right. Okay? So the key here is that the black line is sort of the envelope of the other lines, right? If you let me here, I'm going to highlight, I'm going to zoom into this trigger default shock. What we're showing here is that in this case, the standstill alone, those are the red lines, the red dot, sorry, the red circles. The standstill alone can have positive welfare gains and negative capital losses, meaning capital gains for the creditor. So that when the standstill avoids a default, those are good news. So I don't want to say that standstills are always a bad idea. In particular, in this case, they are a very good idea. The point is that even in this case, they are dominated by write-offs. All right, so these results, as I've been promising, we find that it's robust to a number of extensions or modifications. One related to David's and George's comment is that this is also going to be true, this sort of ranking between the policies that write-offs are better than standstills. And if you have to do a standstill, then it's better to couple it with a write-off. That is robust to having a different type of shock. So for example, a more temporary drop in Y with a slower recovery, or adding a sudden stop, or allowing for a positive recovery rate, or the different thing that I didn't put in the slide, which is just modeling the crisis differently as a debt shock instead of an income shock. All right, so this is the different shock that we do. Okay, so what we do is we say, well, effective income is going to be income times 1 minus chi. Okay, so that's like a shock to the mean, right? And what we're doing is saying, well, 1 minus chi drops for 4 quarters and then it recovers in 4 quarters. Okay. At some point, we thought that this is what COVID-19 shock was going to look like. So maybe we can revisit this now. Okay, we find essentially, I'm gonna show you a collection of these plots, but essentially the message is the same, that the black line is sort of the envelope of the other ones, meaning that write-offs are superior, and if for any reason you have to do standstill, then it seems like a better idea to couple it with a write-off. Okay? Right. The second thing we show robustness to is we try to add a standstill. As David was correctly pointing out, the motivation is that during the crisis, there are concerns regarding liquidity. Okay? And so we think of periods in which the country is experiencing low income, but at the same time cannot borrow. So in those cases, a standstill may be particularly useful, right? So you cannot borrow. So if we can agree on a policy by which you don't have to make debt payments, then that sounds like a good idea, right? So implementing that in our model is the same as adding this constraint to the problem, that the debt issuance has to be has to follow this rule. But essentially, is you cannot. I mean, you can buy back debt if you want, but you cannot issue debt. That's what the equation says. Right. Okay. So now these are the results. The results are. I mean, these are the first time in which we see some crossing of the lines. Okay. But still, the robust punchline is that debt reliefs are inefficient without write-offs. Right? So if you do standstills alone, say we focus on the large shock, if you do standstills alone, which will be along this line, you can always find a better combination of policies that includes a write-off, either from a 3-year standstill or from a 0-year standstill. Okay? So just relying on the standstill, or if you want, not doing write-offs, seems to be a misguided policy. Okay. When we add a positive recovery rate, essentially we have the same results, right? As before, what we find is that standstills produce welfare gains, but capital losses. The capital losses that are triggered by these grace periods or standstill could be mitigated using write-offs, and write-offs only are still the best policy with the recovery. I have the slides for the recovery. If you want, we can go there. Right. All right. So that's the point of the paper. Essentially, our main takeaway is that if standstills without write-offs are favored because of some regulatory cause of write-offs or for some other political reasons, then the paper is has a concrete message, is that, and that is that those inefficiencies that are triggered by these frameworks, some regulatory cause, some other political constraints that force you to do standstills without write-offs, those inefficiencies can be significant.
So Cesar, I mean, to what extent were these policies actually used? They were proposed, floated, but were they actually used in the this episode?
Okay, that's a very good point. So sorry, I accidentally spilled water here, so I don't want to generate some problem. But let me go back to the beginning. Okay. Okay, I have a hidden link here. So here's what the standstill was actually called by the G20. It was called ESSI, so Debt Service Suspension Initiative. Okay, and it was, as Kim asked at the beginning, it was originally for official debt, and it was offered to 73 of the poorest countries. Of all of those, only 48 took it, and this is as of February 28, when this initiative actually closed down. So it's the total take-up. The mean potential relief, meaning the mean potential debt relief that these countries could apply for, was 1.5% of GDP, and they've only actually ended up using shy of 30% of it. Okay, so to answer to there, it wasn't actually that. It wasn't that subscribed. Okay, So the last two bullet points are quotes directly from the World Bank webpage. Okay, the first one says that during the period in which this thing was open for official debt, it suspended something like $30 billion in debt payments. And then the last one says that the G20 also called on private creditors to participate in this. Regrettably, only one private creditor did participate. Okay? So now this bullet point, which is again verbatim from their website, is perfectly consistent with our model. Our model is telling us that private creditors don't want to take part into this because it standstills alone trigger capital losses for them.
But your model would never have anybody not take this, right? So you're 48 of 73 who didn't participate. In your model, you'd always want to take it if somebody offered it, right?
In our model would be 100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you think that the people that didn't take it just weren't having a shock? Do you think that's sort of the idea?
No.
We offered it to everybody.
There was some. I mean, there was some concerns about reputation, okay, which are also absent here. So some countries, I mean, commentators were arguing, countries not taking up on this were worried about being labeled.
It would be seen like a default, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, or be showing some sort of weakness on their finances, and therefore may potentially have negative consequences.
It's like the usual discount window borrowing kind of argument that people would have, right?
Yeah.
Cesar, I have what's probably a dumb question, considering that your model deals with sovereign debt and not corporate debt. But so I think your answer is going to be no. But my question is, does your model vary for those countries that do not have bankruptcy laws?
Do not have bankruptcy law. What would the bankruptcy law?
Well, not every country has a bankruptcy law. Some don't. Some even lack the concept. For many, the Soviet Union, for instance, before it became Russia, had no bankruptcy law.
You mean to settle private disputes?
I mean, the idea that a business could go bankrupt, seek the protection of court to protect its assets, and that other countries could recycle basically those economic assets. Not every economy, not every nation has that concept or those laws.
Yeah. So here essentially there's no bankruptcy law. I mean, there's no recovery for the creditors. So that's sort of the working assumption that if the country walks away on the debt, there's nothing the creditor can do. So there's no appeal to any court, to any international court to get something of the assets.
I guess you could reinterpret Paul's question as, how does the nature of the default cost, affect the way that this policy is going to work, right? Because I mean, in some sense, like, I think Paul's speaking to, like, maybe not to put words in his mouth, but like the domestic institutions and the general institutions. And I don't know, I mean, the default cost is always kind of ad hoc, but you might think that some countries with better institutions have a different kind of default cost type of setup. So it certainly would influence the results you have, I would guess.
Yeah, so let me tell you the bit that I know. So we've played around with other calibrations, meaning with other parameterizations of the default cost. And what we find is that mainly the effect that has is on whether we see the market value of the curve sort of going down, meaning bending and giving the opportunity for like negative capital losses, capital gains. But it doesn't change the result. Doesn't change the result that if you're gonna provide that relief, it's better to do it with a write-off than to do it with a standstill. That is at least for us to the few calibrations that we've used. Again, let me say it again. The only part essential central to the presentation that I've seen change was the fact of the market value sort of bending down or not, but not that doesn't change sort of the ranking of the policy.
Yeah.
I mean that anyway. I don't know how much we want to push on this comment, but that can also be seen in a different way. Switching to the slide, sorry. That can be seen here. So if there is a small shock, you see that all the capital losses are positive, meaning that this thing, that's the economy doesn't go to the wrong side. It's always on the good side. So any reduction in the face value is a capital loss. And even in that case, what the graph is showing us is that the 1 year standstill will be dominated by a write-off of this magnitude or combining the standstill with the write-off. It's not essential for the result that we see the market value curve bending.
So Cesar, it seems critical that they get these like free renegotiations for a surprise, right? But so if you kind of interpret that so I think the whole problem is like you have some debt overhang, right? And the only way normally to kind of deal with the debt overhang is to go through this costly reorganization, and you're letting them kind of do that. But if we kind of knew that you could go through the reorganization, I think maybe Dorian was kind of saying something like this. If you knew that, then aren't they going to take on more debt? And
yeah, that's going to be priced. That's going to be priced in, and it's not obvious that you as a country will want to do that. Yeah. So that's in our version of that is in our 2014 paper, where we essentially think about these opportunities. We call that voluntary debt exchanges, which maybe is a grandiloquent name for a renegotiation. It's a renegotiation that happens after a negative shock. And what we have is we have a model where that is, let me give you the story a bit longer. The standard model has this feature that doesn't allow for the renegotiation. And the standard, this happens in any model with long-term debt, and unless it's a paper about renegotiation, you don't see these opportunities for debt reduction. What we say is, hey, these things happen here. What if we allow the country and the creditor to negotiate on this, to bargain on this, and reduce the debt? And so, ex post, you always like it. That's related to this paper. But ex ante is not always that you like it, because the creators are going to price this, and they know that maybe from time to time they're going to face this possibility that their debt gets reduced.
Can I ask you, like, the debates on this, like, what's the real, I mean, what are they trying to accomplish? Is this basically charity? Is this, they're like worried about the world economy like collapsing, and there's, production networks, like there's all these debates on, like when GM and Chrysler were going out of business, they said, oh, no, we got to keep them in subsidize them because the whole network's going to go down. On the other hand, like with COVID, it's, there's all kinds of charity issues, or not, human health issues, whatever. Like, do you have some sense as to, exactly what the real argument for this is?
I think the argument has been for the first part of the policy proposal, the one that was specifically targeted to low-income countries, was more about sort of a fairness concern, or if you want, humanitarian concern, or you said charity. I don't want to say charity per se, but I'm also lacking the right word. But let's say charity for because we don't have the right word. So I think that's a better explanation, or that's my view for the first part. For the second part, which is the proposals to extend this to middle-income countries, I think that's more related to like avoiding what we know already are the sort of the financial and real disruptions that happen after default. So sort of in the sense of trying to avoid those costs that have been documented. That's my I understand it, but it has these two components.
Cesar?
Yeah.
So when they discussed this possibility of standstill with the Argentinian debt, right, in the 2020, yes, and the argument was kind of part of the argument. So one of the arguments was what you just said, that to avoid default, and the other one was that maybe if you waited until better times, then the creditors will be in better position to negotiate, right? And don't have like they wouldn't have so much losses, capital losses. But does that happen? Does that show up in your exercise in the market price of debt or?
Yeah, so in the exercise, what happens here is that when you do a standstill, you don't, I mean, in the end, these guys don't like it because the compensation that's offered to them is exposed unfair, right? You see again, go back to the IRF. You see this IRF here, the spread, right? That happens after the standstill. There's no default here. I mean, optimally, the country decides not to default. Okay, the spread that's you observe here, that's much more than the compensation that is given in the proposal. So they are poorly compensated, so they don't like it. Right. So that's the reason why it has negative consequences for them. I don't know if that's somewhat of an answer. You also look at what happens to the debt market value. Say we go 16 periods or 4 years into this thing. I mean, in every period here, the optimal policies have been chosen. So I'm not fixing the policies. So that makes the discussion a bit blurry. But you could see that later on, the market value is not, I mean, the market value recovers, right? So this will be a part of the discussion about the Argentinian thing, like waiting until they have better terms. But that's a bit stretching. I don't think I would say that without an Argentinian question.
I was going to suggest, like, some of the stuff you're talking about, it sort of has the feeling of the student loans in the U.S. Right?
Absolutely. Thanks. Yes, I've been thinking about that.
You know, like the forbearance and then like the write-offs. Yeah. But you know, there it's the government's just subsidizing a bunch of people, right? And the spreads aren't changing. Like we're just basically giving you a bunch of, you know, we're basically writing down your debt all along. And I don't know how to think of it, but it just sort of has a lot of that flavor.
It has a lot of that flavor, I agree. And I've been trying to think about that.
I guess it's, you know, it's a different problem. But.
It's a different problem. Back to the earlier question, I think that sort of the contracting environment is different, right?
Yeah, it's very different.
The students cannot just walk away. I mean, they can try, but they're gonna be called for.
At least not yet, right?
Not yet, yeah. But it definitely has. I mean, it's definitely it shares the elements of that student debt forgiveness, of the related to the evictions moratorium. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, here it's cleaner because you know you can kind of just see here there's no like real transfer going on for the most part, and so you can kind of you see it, all those government policies, there's just these massive transfers going on.
Oh, exactly. So yeah, that's what we have. I think we think it's a simple exercise.